So in this shiur, we're going to return to complete the topic that we began with and we're focusing on in the previous shiur, which is when we jumped into this old and forgotten debate back from Tafshin Yud Aleph about Isur Chag Pesach that fell out on Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael, when, as we know, the accepted practice is not to eat chametz at all, not even kitnius, nothing, as if they have an Achrin Shel Pesach that year, like this year. So what I was trying to go through last time was the arguments of Tikuchinsky, however you pronounce his name, who wrote a series, Behem Sheichim, back in Tafshin Yud Aleph, and he was responding to someone who said that you can add a tonight to the shtar to eat right away, or even if you don't, you can take it bigzela. And then I wanted to get those who respond to him and to summarize. But while I was preparing the shiur last week, I was missing something. I was missing some important information because Tikuchinsky is responding at length to someone. He says it's a Rav writing in the paper, and of course, it's preferable when you're discussing something, especially if it's a geschmack machlekes, to find both sides. But I didn't think I would have enough time to start looking. I didn't have an idea of where to begin. And it didn't seem like this is a famous discussion that's mentioned in other svarim. But as I mentioned already quickly last week, in the last few minutes before giving the shiur, I noticed that in the Sefer Noida Bashiurim, which is a biography of Rav Chaim Noah, by the Chabad author and researcher Shnei Zalman Berger. It's printed about 11 years ago. So he has a chapter there on Ha'aretz L'maisa. He writes about how Rav Chaim Noah had this halachic column in the Hamodia newspaper starting from Tafshin Yud Aleph, and has some selected quotes, highlights, with some explanation as to what Rav Chaim Noah was being mechadesh while he was writing there. So I noticed shortly before the shiur on page 195 that Berger writes as follows. Chaim Noah wrote that there are those who are concerned, unsure about eating chametz right after Shemotz Shvi Shel Pesach, and even though it's mutter, but to avoid the pikpukim, he added the following to the shtar, the following quote: "V'gam nosid neshus leishtamish im kol hachametz hanal teikavach hashvi shel Pesach v'yishalmu lo yavar hachametz hamashumish b'mechir hashava al pi hashuma hanizkeres." And that he wrote that he showed this to Rav Bengus, who was the leader of the Eidah Chareidus. Rav Bengus was maskim, and he himself would sign a shtar with his lashon. And Rav Chaim Noah is recommending that everyone else do this as well. So, as I mentioned last time, when I came across this, so something, like a light bulb went off, like I said, seems very similar to what we're talking about here, but it's not mentioning Shabbos though. It's not mentioning, it sounds like Tikuchinsky is responding to something specifically about Shabbos. Maybe there are other issues on Shabbos. And I knew that they had already printed a full sefer of Rav Chaim Noah's Ha'aretz L'maisa, K'tzos Ha'shulchan Ha'aretz L'maisa. And I assumed it made sense that the answer to my question, to my hunch, will be there, but I didn't have the sefer at the time. So I actually asked the same Shnei Zalman Berger, messaged him, I asked him if he happens to have the sefer. And very grateful, mamish, as I was walking here, he sent me the images, the pages of the sefer, and I saw, oh wow, there's the full original discussion and debate under the title Isur Chag the Pesach Shechol B'Shabbos. There's Rav Chaim Noah's writing, and then there's Rav Tikuchinsky's short response, Rav Chaim Noah's response to that, and that's where it ends in the sefer. And that's when I realized that the lengthy thing that I saw in the journal Kol Torah must be a second and final response from Rav Tikuchinsky, in which he's quoting and referring to things that Rav Chaim Noah wrote in his second response. So, now that we have that information ahead of the shiur, with enough time to look, so now I want to take a step back and start the discussion from the beginning, see what details we missed, and then I'll re-summarize what we already, I'll go quickly through what we said last week from Rav Tikuchinsky. So if you look in Sefer Ha'aretz L'maisa, which was printed 8 years ago, after Noida B'Shiurim came out, So they have it arranged according to topics. So they have Shar Chodesh Nisan. So you don't see necessarily the order of which column was printed when. So they have the title Isur Chag the Pesach Shechol B'Shabbos. Now, in addition to the new Seder, they also omit the dates, which is unfortunate, because if you're trying to figure out who said what when. However, in Rav Tikachinsky's response, he says that he's responding to something that was said, that was written Yud Tes Nisan. And his lengthy response is from Sivan Thomas Tafshin Yud Aleph. And we know Rav Chaim Noah started writing his column of Tafshin Yud Aleph, so it's pretty clear that this all began and took place in the month of Nisan, Tafshin Yud Aleph, which like this year had the Sim Kviyas, Gimel Chav Zayin, Muberes. Those who are following the Farbrengens of the Rebbe for years that match this one might be aware of that. So Yud Tes Nisan was Wednesday, Mov Chol HaMoed, and that was the issue coming out for that Shabbos, which was Isru Chag HaPesach, which in Eretz Yisrael is Shabbos Parshas Achrei. So Rav Chaim Noah wrote for that, on that Chol HaMoed, for that Shabbos, that B'negei the Shaila, so he focuses mostly on Muktzah. He says, first of all, if it was Muktzah and Erev Shabbos, right, there's a problem. If it's Muktzah, if it goes into Shabbos, you're not allowed to eat it then because it's still chametz. So it's Muktzah. If it's already Muktzah, the beginning it should be Muktzah all Shabbos. So he says, if it's Muktzah, Erev Shabbos ben Hashmash, it's Machmas Isser Habame Elav. If that's the basis for the Muktzah, we don't say Mikudis Katsoy ben Hashmash, it's Katsoy l'Kulayayma. It's signed to Shulchan Aruch, to Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Yud. Number two, Befrat, that it's when it was chametz, when it had Isser chametz, it belonged to the guy at the time, which is its own discussion, he says. And we're not getting into all this stuff here. And he adds another point, and he says, Mikol Hilin Tame, for all these reasons, Yesh lahater le'ishtamish b'chametz hanimka l'nochri b'yom HaShabbos Isru Chag HaPesach b'frat for Ktanim, and the Gaivid agreed to me, the Gavad Eda Acharedis, which was Rav Zel Gruven Bengus. He was the Gavad from Tafshin Tes to Tafshin Yud Gimel when he passed away, so he was the Gavad at the time when this was written. And I already mentioned his name once last year, that he was related to Rav Dov Yehuda Shachat, the father of the Shachat family, and how they corresponded about an individual who was a menace to children and what you are or not allowed to do to him to stop him. And how Rav Bengus didn't comprehend what Rav Shachat was talking about. So that's his point about Muktzah, and he already concludes, therefore, he's announcing at the head of Shabbos that you're allowed to eat, and the Taina, that's still the guys, without getting into the pilpul, I'm announcing that whoever sold this chametz through me, I got Rishus Mefereshus from the guy to use it, and I put the Seif in the shtar, and he'll trust us to tell him what we took, what we used. So that's the first point that Rav Tikachinsky was quoting, as we saw last week. That was the main point, the main news that Rav Chaim Noah was coming to announce. Then in Haaretz L'Maisa, they print Shaila Me'agrim Tikachinsky, and again they don't actually explain where it was, but from Rav Chaim Noah's response to that, it's clear that it appeared in the Hamodia the next week, Parshas Kedoshim, which is the next week, which like this year was Chav Tes Nisan, which is Kedoshim in Eretz Yisrael. So that means he responded immediately in the same paper. B'shem echad mechashuvei harabanim b'Yerushalayim nisparsim b'itin hamediyah meyud tes nisan. Two things. Number one, there's no problem with Muktzah, and he writes slightly bitingly, Yediyah zu eina chadash haklal. This isn't news. I guess if you're writing a halachic column in the newspaper, it better be news. This is not news. Why is it not news? Because if Tikachinsky prints a luach, and it says it in my own luach. You should know it already. Okay? And number two, unlike what the Luach says that L'Maisa, it's not a problem of Muktzah, but it's a problem of Gezel, so you're not allowed to. He had it written for Tafshin Yud Aleph, you're not allowed to eat the chametz on Shabbos. But this Rav came out and said that those who sold through him, they're allowed to, because he got Rishus and he put in the shtar, and now he gets even sharper. He says, Chidushai, quote unquote, Zeh Leisha Manu, the Eina Yirayli Shama, what kind of Chiddush is this? It is Gezel, and it undermines the Mechira, Chalila, to put in a clause like that. And that's the whole reason why out of Pesach Shechol Yis B'Shabbos, you have the whole problem. If you sell the chametz to the guy, then what are you going to eat? You can't just take what you want from the guy. That's why you have to dafka not sell what you're going to eat to the guy. You have to make sure you finish it, or figure out what to do with it. And he concludes with Tmehani and Rav Yisrael Yiyah Mishiyih Chadash La'atzmei Chidash Kazeh L'Kabel Olav Ha'achrayas Kazu, to take such responsibility, such a Chidash, B'Tanim Yisyashiv Min Abonim Acherim, before discussing with other Rabbanim, before consulting. HaKaisav B'Kol HaKavod V'Habracha. Okay? So that was his sharp response. Clearly, to some extent, it's personal because he put out a luach that said otherwise. So now in the Sefer, we have a response from Rav Chaim Noah, and we can assume at the rate they were going that he probably responded in the next issue, although don't know for sure, but it must have been an ear. So regarding this topic, he says, Harav Hagrimat Shlita came out against me in his article in Hamadiyah, Erev Shabbos Kedoshim. For some reason, he doesn't mention my name, which we see Tukachinsky is consistent about in both places. Doesn't mention who it is. Made it harder for me. All right. So it's too hard to get into everything, but people who read his response might feel guilty. They listened to me, and now he came along and said, no, it's terrible. So Pashat, to assuage their fears, to allay their fear, to make them feel better. So I have to respond to the basic points. He says, and if Ilu Hayapoina Yasharei Lai, if you'd have just turned directly to me, it's not just me, you have Gedolei Torah, presumably, like we mentioned, Rav Bengus. And now he responds in four Asias, slightly longer. Firstly, you're saying it's Gezel Gomer Deraisa, if you could just go ahead and take. Talking about news, Zui be'emes yediyah chadasha etzli. That's taka news to me. Ani betumi, I innocently samachti al Dovid Rabbeinu Balatanya zal b'shulchan aruch, and he quotes the Alter Rebbe, and that's the second point that Rav Tukachinsky responds to in his response. And that's besides, you're saying it's deraisa, there are other places that say it's the Rabbanon, and if it's the Rabbanon, it's mishum chil Hashem. And if here there's no chil Hashem, because he doesn't know what you took, you tell him what you took. So there's no chil Hashem. There's a chil Hashem when you stam go and take people's things. That's a chil Hashem. Number two, he himself invokes the Maram Shik and the Stei Chametz, that someone who touches the chametz that was sold, after it was sold, is mevatel the mechira. And he says, Hagam shedevrei tzarech, but first of all, that itself needs to be explained. How could you be mevatel a mechira? You did a mechira kadin. What do you mean mevatel it? How does that work? But anyway, that's why you went ahead and got reshus. So with just gazel, maybe you run into the Maram Shik and Stei Chametz. But when I put it in the shtar, when I have reshus, so now why should it be mevatel a mechira? It's all above board. And we even wrote that even if someone goes and steals everything, it's still not going to be mevatel a mechira, even for the gazlan. Everything's good. That's why I wrote in the Hamadiyah the first time that without getting into the pilpul, it's mutter. Then he adds, and by the way, this is negay every year, which is the third point that Rav Tukachinsky quotes in his final response, because the guy doesn't always come Matzah Yom Tov, sometimes it takes a few days. He says it's already 15 years that Hanochri HaYadua that we used, he wouldn't leave the old city at night and go into the Jewish neighborhoods because he was terrified for his own security. A guy who's afraid to walk in Jewish neighborhoods at night. Okay? So that's what we're using. So everyone ate chametz meanwhile, and the stores were selling. So v'gazlu v'sanachri, Nebuch, they were robbing the guy, and the Rabbanim were meicha. So what's different over here? Shabbos, weekday. And according to him, it's ma'ar the mechira. Why didn't the Rabbanim say anything? And you can't say that, no, everyone who's eating is assuming that we're soymech on the zrizus of Beis Din. Beis Din always takes care of things right away. Because here, Beis Din itself is at the mercy of the zrizus of the guy, and we know that the guy is not a zaris. V'hu le'haya zaris klal. We know he wasn't a zaris, because he knew whenever he shows up, he'll still get paid for his time. And some specific detail and color, so from here we understand that the guy was, he sold coal. After Pesach, he was still busy doing his own business, and then at some point when he had some extra time, he came back around to sell the chametz back. That's the Metzias Reb Chaim Noah is describing from his corner of Yerushalayim. And then Yemuktzeh, Tukachinsky said, what's the news? It's already in my loach. He says, Kanira shebetos hishmit beis yediyas chadashas mamish. You want news? I had news. because you only wrote one prat in the luach, and I added 2 other pratim. That's Isra Bo Me'elov, so it's now muktzah, and it belongs to the goy, so it's now muktzah. That's where the discussion ends, concludes in the Sefer. Now, as we already know, Rav Tikachinsky is nishka blib in Shuldik, and he responded at length, as we said, in Kol Torah. And since the Sefer of Chaim Noah has no further information, so it seems like Rav Chaim Noah never responded again. So each makar is completing the other, and if you have one and not the other, you only have a partial picture. It's not a mazel that I picked up on this in the last few minutes before I gave the shiur last week, because I heard that there was a younger man here who was already bakant that in the Sefer Ha'aretz L'maisa Seretzach Harum about this topic, and oy vavoy if I would have come, and okay, anyway. So, get out of it. So now let's go back and summarize what Rav Tikachinsky said, what we said last week, very much bekitzer. And we still have to finish what he said, because I never even got to his response to what about the Alter Rebbe about Gezel. There's no problem with Gezel. Why does Rav Tikachinsky think there is a problem with Gezel? I didn't even get to the end last week. And we'll get into some of the pratim. Right, so his main arichas was about adding dafka. You want to add the clause to the contract? That's terrible. And your mamish undermining the mechira from within. Right, so he began by quoting the Manam Shik and the Stei Chamed about Erev Pesach, taking from the mechira a kol shekain if you start selling a mill of Pesach, like the Stei Chamed told the story. Now, Rav Chaim Noah himself, he mentioned it, he invoked it himself. And Rav Chaim Noah said, that's why I wrote it in the contract. You're not undermining the mechira, this is part of the mechira. But why? So what's Rav Tikachinsky responding? Clearly, Rav Tikachinsky sees it as a much deeper thing. If this is an action, if by this action, by taking from it a mul of Pesach, that undermines the mechira, then how does putting that in the shtar help your case? You took something that undermines the mechira, you put it in the mechira. You took your crime and you put it on the books. How does that help? L'chayra, that's his countertaina, that it fundamentally is at odds with the nature of the mechira. And now here's a long Maimer HaMuzgar. Right, so one of the Ingalai pointed out to me that before we continue about Isra Chag, l'chayra, this is a very, very important question. Right, we have Mivtza Mechiras Chametz. We're trying to get as many people as we can to sell their chametz for Pesach, for individuals, for companies. Now, most of them are probably going to continue using the chametz on Yom Tov, on Pesach. Are we going to go with the Ram Shik and the Stei Chamed and say that, they're being about to the mechira, ois mechira, so it was a waste of everyone's time? And B'emes from Chaim Noah's pre-buttal to Rav Tikachinsky, it seemed like he wasn't so nispal b'chlal from the shit. Okay, so they said that, lav dafka, okay. So I found, I'm sure others have written about it, I came across an article written by someone of the name of Rabbi Avi Zakutinsky here in New York. He wrote it in Hamor, Tavshanai and Zion. I believe I know his family. I think his grandparents have a pretty stark shaychus to Chabad, children and grandchildren less so. He is the author actually of a number of volumes called the Mekarev B'Yamin, Shailas and Halacha that are relevant to Kiruv. So he's also thinking along these lines. And this seems to have been a chapter from this series that he published in Hamor. So the premise is, you have Balei Tshuva, their parents are in Frum, the Balei Tshuva are visiting their parents after Pesach. What do you do now? So first he begins with the question of what if they didn't sell the chametz? Is it possible that we can say, are there shittas that say that if you're mamash mechal Shabbos, then it could be dafka the din of chametz over Elva Pesach doesn't apply to you? Apparently there are some shittas like that, but then he says, Mishnah Berurah says pretty clearly that it's Aser B'Hanoah, and Taka, if you look it up in the Alter Rebbe as well, Siman Tov Mem Chesef Chavav, can't sell your chametz to a meshumit. Avbi Shechata Yisraelhu, and Chamtzei Sha'avar Alva Pesach Aser B'Hanoah K'Chamtzei Shal Yisrael. So the Alter Rebbe is pretty clearly negating that idea. The Mishnah Berurah is Mitzayin Ta'achareinim, which often alludes to the Alter Rebbe. Then he moves on to the question of, can we sell it on their behalf? So the first question he has is, can you sell without their knowledge? Can we say, you're doing them a favor, they'll be maskim, you're being nizaka, loyla adam. So he brings a few poskim and say that's fine. He quotes among others from Rav Henkin and Gvuras Eliyahu. They were malak a few years ago. The malak at all of Rav Henkin was the posik in America even before Rav Moshe. All of his minus and shuvas. So quotes from Henkin that said that Taka Some Rabbanim that make a Tanai that those who are nanas or they forgot and they didn't sign the Shtar Harsha until after the Zman, but their chametz is also included in the Mechira. But they should be in touch with the Rav at some point on Erev Pesach, and it's better to put it in, better that they should write B'Ksav Taka alongside like that. That was Taka their Kavana all along. And then later on, in Gevurah Siliyo, they bring a nusach of a shtar that Rav Henkin used one year, and there's taka nusach there in his shtar, Gam HaChametz Shel Anashim, Shadayin Lechosvim Lach Mashech Chavoines, V'yivoyu Achers Ma'anisr Chametz, Hayoyim, Anoichi Mizakalem, Amer Chemtza Me'achshav, Kaidens Ma'anisr Chametz, which is his own topic, but related to this idea of selling without their knowledge. And then he gets to our topic. What about the problem that they're just going to keep on eating it and using it through Pesach? So he starts by quoting this Teichamed and Manamshik, this issue, and then he brings some poskim from some contemporary poskim. So one of them is Rav Sternbuch, we mentioned it many times. Shuvas Van Haggis, Chelik Aleph, Siman Reish Peches. There's no date, but it was printed, I think, in Tafshin Lamed Zayin, and it's still deep in his career as a Rav in South Africa. So whatever he's talking about is clearly referring to there. So the question is, you have big stores here in South Africa that make a mechira, and then the store stays open on Pesach. What's going on here? So he says, there's a Rav here that paskin and said, you're allowed to buy from the stores after Pesach, because they did a mechira. Either selling on Pesach, that's a gazlan, but the chametz still remains the guy's, and it's not chametz she'over olva Pesach. Ani persamti, he says, I announced the opposite, she'aser. Now, there's so many stores here in South Africa that are owned by Jews, or at least a strong partnership. It's hard to aser everything after Pesach, so people were challenging me on this, and they brought a chavas das me America lahater. So it sounds like there was a mini controversy about it there. And we'll get soon to Deis from America on this topic generally. It says, I'm standing, ich halt my minds, that Mechiras chametz works if you put it aside, v'nikir ha-mechira, but if the chametz is out just as before, that's your way of being megala daita, there's no mechira, it's not chal. There's the din that if you, back then when they used to give the key to the guy had to have access. So, as well, he's quoting it from the Mishnah Brura, that if you block his access, then that shows that you never meant mechira. So it's the same concept here. Right, he never moved the chametz at all, the store, everything stayed stocked just as before, open just as before, so it's just a harama and ikeres, etc. Shuv mitzasi b'steichamed. And he says, the whole knas, why is it also after Pesach? It's a knas. Kadesh le'hei chaytei nisker. No, so if we allow this mechira to go off, isn't that the ultimate chaytei nisker? They make a mechira, they use the chametz on Pesach, it's a chaytei nisker, so the concept of punishing them still applies here. Then he quotes, there's a different chayim. The Divrei Chaim seems to say that if you sell on behalf of a Meshumid, it is a good sale. And we don't say that the only reason why the Meshumid is doing it is because he wants others to not have a problem with his chametz, but not that he himself has a feeling for selling chametz. But he says that's not a comparison, because there, Zichur, he wasn't selling it on Pesach. And he did everything kedaboi, he did everything properly. That's why it's good. Here, what you're doing is announcing to everyone that it's not a good sale. The shayla there was that we don't believe that the Meshumad really means it himself. The Meicher doesn't mean it. Sometimes you have a question if the guy means it. Here, the Meicher doesn't mean he's a Meshumad. He's just saying, okay, I know who I'm doing business with, or Yitten here. Sternbuch says, Avada, he must have been doing everything according to the book. It's just that his kavan, okay, then we say that it's fine. But if your actions are announcing that you don't mean it. So he says, the Maisa, Mechal Shabbos, you have to make sure they don't sell the chametz, and you have to make them sign that they understand what the mechira is, and that they are fully on board, and they're fully emotionally, he wants to go even further than the Divrei Chaim, you have to make sure that they're fully coming along with for the ride. Same thing with the guy, you have to make sure the guy is fully on board. So he's taking that position. But then he says, you have other poskim now who say the opposite. He quotes the Chalkas Yaakov, Eirach Chaim, Siman Kuf Tzadik Dalet. I mentioned the Chalkas Yaakov last year regarding a big discussion he had with the Minchas Yitzchak over a mamzer. Can he buy a shifcha nowadays so he can be matar his children? They should be ois mamzerim. I mentioned him this year also regarding vending machines on Shabbos. So he has in Siman Kuf Tzadik Dalet the shaila mutter las shtar mechira al Pesach for someone who sells on Pesach, and it's addressed to Rav Shlomo Schneider, who was a Rav of Agudas Achem in the Bronx. I've actually mentioned Rav Shlomo Schneider's name before as well. Last year we were talking about on Hey Tevis. I was talking about stealing svarim in halacha. So I mentioned that there's a tshuva to him in the Minchas Yitzchak about someone who took a sefer from yeshiva when he was a bacher, against the shaila. And at the time, I pointed out that I noticed that if the shaila is addressed to Rav Shlomo Schneider actually has his own set of shut. And if you search, you can find the other part of the correspondence. I found his shaila there then. And because I was reminded of that now, so then I went now to check, is there anything in Divrei Shlomo on this? And sure enough, in Chelik Beis Siman Kuf Chav Gimel, we have Rav Shlomo Schneider's shaila, which we can see was from Iyar Tafshin Chav Gimel. And I'll get back to what he writes there after I quote the response to the Chalkas Yaakov. So the Chalkas Yaakov addresses him and says, sorry for getting back to you so late, because at the end we see he sent it Adar Tafshin Chav Dalet, so it took him a while to get back to him. But to get to your question, your shaila was full of bekiyas and charifas. You want to hear my opinion? It says, Lafini is daiti. Not only is it mutter, but we're mechayev la'afrushim yisurim. We have to save as many people as we can from yisurim. And we don't have the vart here of we're not achray for amoyin or halitayu l'rasha. Let the guy do his avedis. No, we don't say that here. We have to be mafresh me'yisura. So if he wants this, and we also want to stop him from after Pesach. We don't want to cause a yid to be selling chametz after Pesach. It's not just a problem of him having the chametz during Pesach. It's a problem of him selling it after Pesach. So if he's willing to go along with us and do a mechira, so it shouldn't be a problem now, at least not after Pesach. So mutter, b'gam mechuyavim, as we'll explain. And he starts off by quoting the same Divrei Chaim. Divrei Chaim describes there was a meshumah with a goyish wife, and each year he sold his chametz to a yid, and the yid sold it to the goy. And one year the meshumah wrote to his wife that he was on the road, he's not going to make it home for Pesach, so she should sell it to the yid, lefanim. Like he wrote to her in the letter, okay, go through the charade of selling chametz, please, for me. And let the Jew do what he does so that we don't have problems afterwards. That was the tone of his letter to his wife. And now they're asking, he literally put it in writing that he thinks it's all a fiction and it's lefanim. Divrei Chaim said that Bechlal, a yid's allowed to sell his friend's chametz, ki mistam anichale, that's Bechlal. And in this case, he participated himself. He wrote lefanim. He just means that he knows that, of course, after Pesach, we always sell it back. So to him, it looks like a mechira lefanim. But if he would have known that it has to be a mechira gemura, surely he would have been on board that it should be a mechira gemura. So you see, the Divrei Chaim, that was his response to this type of question. So you see, and the Chalkas Yaakov has the complete opposite assumption. Avada, they were eating and selling the chametz on Pesach. Okay, you can assume whatever we want. So that's what he assumes. And still, the chametz was mutter achar Pesach when they did a shtar mechira. And even though he wrote lefanim, Divrei Chaim didn't have a problem with that. He says, Bechlaya, it's a sugya, and Baba Basra, tell you v'zoven, zvine zvine, you sell, but you're not fully in it, but the sale's a sale. Right? So if he's participating, we should just assume it's fine and not ask too many questions. And here it's even better, because it's a mitzvah in the mechira. It's not just a regular mechira where you say zvine zvine. Here you're saying it's a mitzvah, not to be everyone bal yirah, and it shouldn't be also after Pesach, and yid who buys from him shouldn't be nichshel. So you have also the idea of kaifin oisat shiyem reitzani. He quotes the Horambam, deep down, a yid wants to do the right thing. So even for Isra Eishes Ish, a get mu'ussas pasal min ha'Torah, but if we say kaifin oisat legarsha, even if he says before and afterwards that I don't agree, I want to stay married, we have the biggest gilei das, but we say no, b'shas ma'isa is reitzani. So same thing here. Even if we're toil, even if we assume that deep down, unless he really want this mechira, but if he says reitzani, b'shas the mechira, it works. Sai, because that works for every mechira, and Sai, because it's a mitzvah, so that should just add, that should just make it more powerful, not to be over, and all these things. So Abazoi, he doesn't have the kayach to be mevatel his mechira by selling it afterwards to people, even during Pesach. And Befrat, the Shleimar, he doesn't want to be mevatel the mechira for everything else, so he shouldn't have the headaches like the Meshumad wrote. B'tzad his Yetzer Hara, he's not choishish about the Bal Yirov, the thing that he is selling, but for everything else, he still wants it, it shouldn't be aser. And now he returns to the Yisur he mentioned at the beginning, that there's a Bechal, a Chiyuv la'afrushim Yisur, even for the Shoyim. He quotes, there's a Tuv Tam B'das of Shlomo Kluger, that says, you see in Gemara, sometimes it looks like they would go and be mitzayin different fields that are aser for different things. Sometimes it sounds like we care, and sometimes it sounds like we don't care. So the Shlomo Kluger is masber there, that this only, when you say Halitei L'Rosha, that's only if you try to fix the Aveda, he's still going to do something similar. He's going to end up doing another Aveda with the same thing. Say, Bazai, leave him alone, let him just do the original Aveda. But if you could save him from doing no Avedas, even if he's the biggest Rasha Aveda, you have to save a Yid, stop a Yid, prevent a Yid from doing Avedas. And he says, "V'davar zeh nafkamina l'kama dinim." So you see, there's a very chashuv yesod here in Shlomo Kluger, b'chlal, negayat being mekar of Yidden today. Shlomo Kluger is saying that even the biggest Rasha, if you could just clean profit, save him from Avedas, Avada, you have to go and save people. So b'zeh ha'chinam b'nidin didan, even if he's doing other yisurim with the things he is selling, but the things he doesn't touch, to save him from Bal Yirot, to save the chametz from chametz achar Pesach, Avada, we have to save the chametz, we have to save him. And at the end, he gets to our point, which is about, what about is it mevatel the mechira? There's there's some rabbanim that are mefakbik, the steichemet, that's just lamigdar milsa, that was just, back in the day, someone's going to sell it and then touch it, so to really put the fear of God in them, so they told them, no, you're being mevatel the mechira. And that's for places where people are from, people listen to Rabbanim. But unfortunately, where we are today, that's not the time and place to do a migdar milsa like that. If we go all the way to the extreme, I mean, he says, how many people don't say the bittul, aren't mevatel chametz of Pesach? They don't say the kol chamira. And according to the Tavur Shur, mechira only works after the bittul. So we're already assuming we have to be seimach on the Pesach that say that you can do mechira without bittul. So what's the world we live in now? So Kolel shel davar, there's no room for being migdar milsa. If someone wants to do the right thing, don't push him off, go ahead and help him. But for that, now we don't even write the amount, we just say ad lemedida, whatever is measured. So after Pesach we'll measure, we'll see what chametz is there. That chametz will be part of the mechira. Whatever he sold is not part of the mechira. So it's not mevatel, it's lemafreh, it turns out to be excluded from the mechira. Shagisi, Hashem atay b'chaper ba'adi, it's only in the Fini daiti, not every time and place is the same, to make sure you don't end up turning the mechiras chametz into a joke.
What was that point about what he sold wasn't in the mechira?
Because you don't actually specify what's in the mechira. So the idea is that sort of after Pesach we're going to sit down and we're going to measure and see, well, what was actually sold. We'll figure it out then if we need to. So if you took things out, so I guess that's not part of the mechira. We'll sit down after Pesach and see what is left, and that is part of the mechira.
But the things that he did sell on Pesach, would have to be Israel?
That's according, no one is suggesting otherwise, no matter what you say. So, if you look there in the Shut, Divrei Shleim Taka of Schneider's Shut, so in Hashmatas Te'eshayel, he brings their Taka a lot of Gedolei HaPoskim in Europe, even before the war, that were discussing cases like this. They already were multiplying back then. And he also mentions in his question, we see from his question, he already mentioned to the Chalkas Yaakov, there's already an Igros Moshe. Igros Moshe Chelek Aleph had already come out. And in Igros Moshe, Chaim Chelek Aleph Simcha from Tas, so there's a Shayel, there's a Tshuv from Tavshin Yud Zayin, to Nachman Yosef Goldstein. He says the stores that sell the chametz to the Rav, but we suspect that he's continuing to sell chametz. And he's taking from the chametz that he sold. Pasha she'ein ze bittul al mechira. And if Moshe adds something interesting, ki mitzat tnai ha-mechira la-hagoy nichtav b'shtar ha-mechira shema she'yitel yiyah kekoyna oz me-hagoy v'yitztarech l'nakes me-asach shechayev le-hagoy. It sounds like he's describing the identical, or close to the identical Tanai of Chaim Noah, which is very interesting. That it says in the shtar that whatever he'll take, that's like he bought it back from the guy. So, there's no bittul on the mechira. on whatever he didn't take from the guy. And Bechlal, even without that, even if you don't write it in the shtar, Ein Shaykh Labatal Kinyan, Shikvar Nasa, you're not a Bailam on it anymore, you're a Kaina Mechadash, you're a Gazlan. And you're over and whatever you took, but now whatever is left. And you can't say Glai Milsa that he didn't sell it Belev Shalom. No, Mehechatese. He's chashud to grab a bite. Maybe he's chashud that Nabach, his Yetzer Hara, overcomes him on Pesach and he wants to eat a Danish. That's one Yetzer Hara. What does it have to do with everything else? There's no way to eat a Danish on Pesach beheter. So he does an Isser. Everything else could be Bechidas Chametz beheter. Why are you extrapolating from here to there? He wants this, and he also wants everything else to be done beheter. Why not? Etc. Lachim baru pasha shemachira kayamas v'toiv asan. That was part of the Shlomo Schneider's question. You have this with Moshe, but he says, but you have the steichema. You have all these other mekaydes that say that it is about the mechira, and Igros Moshe, maybe Kedarka isn't really acknowledging these other opinions. Then he cites the Chalkas Yaakov's tshuva, which we also have in the Chalkas Yaakov. Chalkas Yaakov didn't address the Igros Moshe directly, but he addressed the steichema directly and specifically disagreed with him. So now the Divrei Shlomo Schneider himself adds, that based on the Igros Moshe, a Rav gave a letter, a certificate to hotels in the Catskills. It was a big industry back then. Bali Molenim Shebahari Hasada. That he gave them a certificate, your chametz was sold properly. So they hung it up in the window. You see, we have a certificate of sale of chametz. And it's misleading. It implies that everything's kosher. It almost looks like it's a heksher. There's a certificate hanging in the window. Meanwhile, they were open on Pesach. They were selling chametz to people. They were selling the velos of Terefis. So there's an example of someone making a mistake. You write the certificate, and then it gets completely misused. You're being machshel derabim. Sure, that's not what Rav Moshe meant. And then Rav Schneider adds, now we have a new krach, Igros Moshe chelik. It is chelik daled, Eirach Chaim chelik beis, and in Sim Tzadik Aleph, we see that Rav Moshe is explaining his tshuva, justifying it, and he adds, ha'ikr is that you're trying to be matzal achedim. Right, the whole point is you're trying to save people from Avedis and Mechshelis. So the Rav Moshe himself says, you can't give him a ksav, a certificate that says that you sold this chametz. Because you're still not allowed to buy from him, because maybe the guy's still doing business with chametz during Pesach. You don't know what you can't trust this person as a fruma yid, so you have to make sure that remains clear. So Taka, maybe word of this got back to Rav Moshe, and he clarified. The Rav has to tell him clearly, I'm telling you, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm telling you it's also to buy and sell chametz. And if the Rav thinks it's better, the outcome will be better if we don't let him sell, then the Rav has a shus. So it depends on the situation. So we see that there was this big discussion at the time among the Rabbanim in America. He's been signed to a few more.
He said that you could sell it, just you should make sure to tell them that they're not allowed to buy and sell.
Right, and not to write a certificate if it's going to be misused and fool people into thinking that everything in the store is kosher. Yeah. Yeah, so we have the Igros Moshe, we have the Chalkas Yaakov. Okay, we don't have that much time left, but another Rav here in America, the base Avi, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Libes, so he was a Chashav Rav in Poland and here in Brooklyn. So in Chelik Aleph Simon Gimel, he has a letter that he wrote to Rav Moshe, right, I guess when the Sefer came out, and he has a whole discussion. Can we say Sefer Yechiach al Tchilasai? The fact that he in the end he uses chametz does not prove that Milchatchila he never had the right kavana. In the end he says, no, we don't say that, but he brings an interesting tushta. There's an Sivis in Simon Tzadik that says that if you sell something to your friend for $100 and then you grab it back from him, but by the time you grabbed it back from him, it's only worth $50. So now, how much do I owe you? I stole it from you. Do I owe you $100 because that's what you paid me for it? Or do I owe you $50 because that's what it's worth now? So Zak, the Sivis, you owe $50 because now you're a Gazlan. You did a new transaction. B'shas Agzela, K'shas Agzela. But if you made Psakinyan and the guy paid the money, but you're going to give the chayfetz later, and then the Meicher says, you know what? I don't want to give you the chayfetz anymore. Can the Meicher say, now I only owe you $50 back. You paid me $100. I never gave you the thing. Now it's only worth $50. I only pay $50 back because that's what it's worth now. That'll be a great trick, wouldn't it be? So the Siva says, no. Because in this case, you're not a gazlan, you're mevatel ha-mekach. You never gave it to him, so by withholding it, you're mevatel the mekach. So Beis obviously says, from the Nesibus it sounds like that in a case like this, where you're supposed to sell it, you never gave it to him, then you kept it, you're mevatel the mekach.
You got the money, but you didn't give the chametz.
Yeah.
And now you want to give back half of the money.
You're saying, I only owe you 50 because that's what it's worth now. And that's how Rav Libes concludes. But l'chayra, you can be mechalik easily, because everyone is made that what you actually took, what you actually kept for yourself, what you actually sold during Pesach, of course the mechira doesn't apply to that anymore. But who's to say that it's mevatel the mechira for everything else? The Nesivus is talking about the object itself. But maybe if you took 10 objects, you sold him 10 objects, and you gave him 9 and you withheld 1, so then you're maybe only mevatel the mechira on the 1. I don't know. Anyway, you see it's a big discussion over many generations, and a lot of sub-discussions, different inyanim that it touches on. We saw the Igros Moshe and the Chalkas Yaakov. Back to Rabbi Zakutinsky, so he also quotes Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that says it's fine. Rabbi Yomer, Rabbi Yosef says it's fine that these stores sell chametz on Pesach, but the mechira is still a mechira. Although they don't get into the mevatel the mechira issue, they talk more about the issue of do they really mean it? That's a lav dafka they're really touching. Okay, anyway. But at the end, he says it's actually a makar from the Rebbe. To his credit, he quotes the Rebbe, and there's taka a very major minor from the Rebbe on this. It was printed in a bunch of places. Among others, it's an Igris Chelik Yutes, and it touches taka on a lot of the ideas we're talking about here. It's a minor to Shmuel Pesach Bogomilsky, who was asking on behalf of another Rav elsewhere about what to do. Should they sell the chametz for people that are going to they're going to keep on eating the chametz or selling the chametz? The Rebbe wrote, Zayin Nisan Tafshin Chaf, Pasha should tzarech l'sadeh shamechidas chametz, hate'eles vadois. Benefit is a sure thing. And never mind, it's going to be mo'er, and remind them about Yisr chametz, minagavis, who knows what kind of spiritual impact it will have. The chashash that they're going to take it from the middle of Pesach, the Rebbe writes 6 points. Number 1, pshita that some won't. Number 2, even those that might, it's not as certain as the certainty of that you're helping them if this works. Number 3, even if they take it, like kamedeis loy batla hamechira, and he's mitzayin to the Alter Rebbe and Tafim Ches about if you gave the key to the guy and then you put your own stamp on it, we say that it doesn't override the fact that you gave it to the guy. It's its own discussion. So you're stealing what you took for sulay midi. Even then the Rebbe says 4. Even if you say batla hamechira, maybe it's only mikano lahaba. So at least you saved him from Bal Yirah until now. And now it just Number 5, afil man da'amar the leiken olav tzarachian ma machriya. All 8 days of Pesach with Bal Yirah, Bal Matzah without Malkus, or for one moment when you're the Rega being mevatel the Kniya, you did a love that the leiken olav. So you did a Maisa. Number 6, even if you say that Batla hamechira lamafreya, Adraba, Ebazoi, weiter in kan Maisa, because you're mevatel lamafreya. It's not like you did a Maisa now. So these are the factors that Rebbe mentions. The Rebbe says, talk to the Rabbanim you're talking to and ask them, what would it help if we added the following? Either number 1, that the Yid or his representative can, if they're selling chametz, can act as representatives of the Goy. So throughout Pesach, we're employees of the Goy who's the true owner of the chametz. Can we put that in the shtar? Number 2, maybe we could say this vart, similar to what we mentioned earlier, that ad lemedida we have to wait till we actually see what's there. So whatever he takes now, that won't be included. Of course, you have to still tell the Meichim they're not allowed to do it. But even if they're over on this Isser, it won't be Chash Bittul Mechira anymore. So we see that the Rebbe mentions Bittul Mechira, says different Efanim. Maybe it's not Batla. If it's Batla, maybe it's only Mekana Lahaba, or maybe it's Lamafreya. So the Rebbe's not taking a side on that. But Lamaisa, the Rebbe says, still go ahead with it, and you hope that it works. And the Rebbe gave 2 practical hatzahs. Either that we should structure it that throughout Pesach you're acting on behalf of the guy, you're selling on behalf of the guy, or to exclude it from the Mechira. And Rabbi Oberlander, Baruch Oberlander actually wrote about this Maina in Ha'aras Leitera of Shavuos Tafshinayin Hey, and he's mitzayin there that Rabbi Bogomilsky's Kontresim Shilas Perushim B'Yurim number 2, which I've quoted before, one of the other ones about his tainus on Kitzur Dinei Tara. So he brings Gan Tzarichis who he spoke to, Rabbi Pekarskin, Rabbi Rifkin, Rabbi Quint, And there's a lot of interesting details. We don't have time, unfortunately, to describe the whole background, but you can mamish get the whole story, a whole picture of the background for where the Rebbe's answer was coming from. Lamaisa, after the Rebbe wrote that Maina, he went to Rabbi Harlik, the father, the Rav, and he said to go with the first option, to structure it that if you're selling on Pesach, it's on behalf of the Goy. So he wrote up a telegram to the Rav who was asking him this question. The Rebbe was Magia, the telegram, this lashon of how to do this. But Arbalander also points out that in Rabbi Eliyahu Quint, the masker, who was also Shtikl Rav, not a Lubavitcher, in his Sefer Menuchas Eliyahu, he also seems to describe the same incident, that here in New York, there were Chalukei Deis, Rabbanim, about these people that used the chametz on Pesach, V'shamaiti b'shem echad migdali admaidim, goin v'gadol b'tayra, sha'amar, that we should say that the things that they're taking, that's not included in the sale. So he's telling the story from his angle. It's clearly the same thing. Interestingly, he focuses on the second option that Rebbe wrote, which the other Rabbanim seem to reject. And we see from the Rabbi Gamulski's story that the Rabbanim that he was in touch with went along with the first option. And it almost sounds like the Rebbe was machadash here, this idea, that until then, all these discussions in America, it doesn't seem like they suggested this idea, that just say that they're working on behalf of the guy. I'm not saying the Rebbe was the first one to say this in history, but from this context, it sounds like the Rebbe came along with this shtickle chiddush. The pashtus, that's how the Aksherim structure it now, when you have a company that's clearly going to be still in operation on Pesach. That's the Maimer HaMusker. Back to Rav Tukachinsky. Okay, so we don't have time to summarize everything again. Let's just get to the points that I didn't say it. So, right, well, last thing we mentioned last week was that he was very surprised. Chaim said, every year, every Matzah Pesach, there's a problem. The guy doesn't come back in time. And he says, what are you talking about? If Shmuel Salant was very makbid, Utzi Pesach Frank has been makbid for the last 40 years. And by the way, I didn't get into all the politics here, but there might be some tension here. Rav Chaim, he's quoting Rav Bengus. Rav Bengus is the Eidah Charedis. Tukachinsky is quoting Tzvi Pesach Frank. Tzvi Pesach Frank is the Rabbanut. Right? So at some point, the Kehillah in Yerushalayim split. There's the Rabbanut and the Eidah Charedis. So perhaps that's also part of the dynamic here of the Rabbanut is more from than the Eidah Charedis. Maybe that's also impacting the Sgan as well, the way they're talking to each other. I started saying already then that we find Rabbanim now that say on a regular Matzah Pesach that you could eat right away. Although I've heard subsequently that Amal, people growing up in Crown Heights, heard Lav Davka, maybe you should wait. So it's not like there's an official Chabad Shita. That's where we got to previously. We never got to his response about what about the Gezel. That Chaim said it's mutter to take it, it's not Gezel. But in this final installment, Shabbat Adar Tavshin Beis, he said the Shraga gam divrei Rabbeinu Balatanya. That's also a mistake, because that's only Be'egil Yod of Beheter. Once you already have it Beheter like a Pikadon, which is what it's talking about in the Gemara about Leisachmed, and that's what it's talking about in the Alter Rebbe. You have it already now, and now you're just going to keep it. So that is Leisachmed, not Leisigza. But if you go outright and grab it from them, it is Leisigza. And you said it's the Rabbanan. That some say that Gezla is midrabanan, but I'm not naktina that it's minatayna. Now, what's the story? Is he correct about the Alter Rebbe or not? So I didn't get to a clear maskana. I noticed that the Dayan Raskin in his Sefer, in his Sivim Shlichus, writes a Pashtos that you can eat right after Pesach, and he writes a Pashtos because the Alter Rebbe says in Siman Tov Mem that you're allowed to, that you're allowed to eat you're allowed to steal from the guy. But he doesn't get into this question. And I looked through some Svarim, and it seems like other Svarim also seem to just assume that it's Shayach Bechlal, even if it's not, even Loi Bo the other Beheter. In fact, it's also negated to the previous discussion, because if you're selling it on behalf of a person who's not from, so are you being Machshalim and Gezel? No one mentioned that in that whole discussion, but I saw one of the Svarim today that talks about these issues of Bali Tshuva. He makes this point as well, that if you go without the Rebbe, Kumtais, that there's no problem of Gezel for those people that are, there might be over on chametz on Pesach, but at least they're not being over on Gezel. The funny thing is that Tukachinsky concludes with a Maisa lister. He says that Shmuel Salant, back in the day, they came to Mechalamoy, they said that we need the medicines. The medicines were also sold with the chametz. So he said, Tikchu b'gneva manas l'shalem. And B'shul Ibdiskin, you heard the same story with him as well. But he says, first of all, even from a year, you're allowed to take manas l'shalem in this chshash, sakanas nefashis. And also, the refuahs are not chametz gomer, so that taka is not a full mechira, but everything else, can't say it. And he concluded, if Tukachinsky Chalil Hachnas Hisofa like this, such a hisafa in the shtar, chas v'shalom. Oh, let's just, one more minute, let's conclude. So, this is the old machlekas. We got to the end of Rav Chaim Noah versus Rav Tikachinsky, Isru Chag Pesach, Eretz Yisrael, Tavshin Yud Aleph. So, who won the debate? So on the one hand, it seems like Rav Tikachinsky won the debate, because it sounds like everyone in Eretz Yisrael doesn't eat on the Shabbos. That's what I'm told. Does that mean that we're taka paskening like him all the way? On the other hand, I said there are Chabad Rabbanim that seem to say that you're allowed to steal matzah Pesach, regular matzah Pesach. And the Gabbai is saying that it's mevatel the mechira, we saw it's also very, very far from simple. So last week I got in touch with Rabbi Avishid, who spoke here earlier that week, and he wrote and he sent me the voice notes, and in his opinion, there's talking out a problem of muktzah, there's talking out a problem of gezel. It's a menig, there's a menig in Eretz Yisrael, this is what we do, and there's different reasons. You know, all your Pesach Kakelim are still out in the house, you're going to start eating chametz now. And B'chlal, we know that the Rebbe is a sichur, Tavshin Yud Aleph, the Rebbe just mentions the pashtus, that by the way, in Eretz Yisrael, this Shabbos is a Pesach Dika Shabbos. So, that's what it is, Lamaisa. It doesn't mean that we're accepting of Tikachinsky's argument, halacha Lamaisa. The Garbi, the T'nai of Chaim Noah, so as far as I can tell, it's not very widespread, didn't catch on. Although Rav Moshe seems to be describing something similar. I did see that, and they printed the Mechtavim of Rav Pinchas Epstein, who was the Ra'avad of the Eda Charedus at the same time as Rav Bengus, that in a letter he writes to Pshitas, oh yeah, in our shtar we have this nusach, and he quotes the same nusach. So you see he's also acknowledging that was their nusach. And I found one article from Tavshin Samachas that says that in the shtar Mechzike Hadas Belza, now in Yerushalayim, they still have this lashon, so it seems like that lashon has still been preserved somewhere. And I wanted to get to Vad Yosef. Seems to be the only major Pesach that says you could eat on a Shabbos like this. And he has an article of Vad Yosef Toledano, who has a Sefer Mishpat HaMechira, where he quotes Rav Tikachinsky and responds to him. One of the things he says is, Fakert, from your Mises with stealing the medicine, is a Raya Fakert, that Lamaisa you could steal. But we don't have time to get into that, so we'll have to leave that as Ten Chacham Yachkamoit.
Okay.